Okay, so today we're going to be making beef stroganoff, and we're starting with one of my favorite cuts of meat, which is a chuck roast. And usually I'll make this dish if I have some leftover pot roast or some leftover meat that if I don't use it quickly, it's going to go bad, but I may not have a lot of meat. So usually I don't start with fresh meat, but I just wanted to show you what it looked like when you do start with fresh meat. And it's amazing at the end of it, whether you're using meat that's maybe a day or two old from a previous meal, or if you're starting from scratch like this one. So my first order of business is going to be separating out the meat from the fat. And then after that, I'm going to cut the fat into little pieces and then fry it so we can render out all of the fat from those pieces and separate it out from the connective tissue. Then we're going to cube our remaining meat, fry it in the fat. We'll boil that meat to get a nice rich broth. While that meat's boiling, we're going to caramelize some onions and mushrooms and garlic. And when all of that's done, we'll be able to put everything together into a gravy, and it's such an amazing flavor combination. I highly recommend that you try out this meal. So yeah, I'll check back in with you after I've separated out the fat from the meat, and then we'll go from there. All right, so I have my fat bits and my meat bits separated out from that chuck roast, and I'm going to cut up these fat bits so that they're much smaller so that the fat will render out of them much more easily. And while I'm doing that, or after I've got them cut up, I'm going to throw them in the cast iron skillet, and I'll start them out at high heat, but we'll lower that temperature to low so I can render out the fat without burning the actual meat parts and connective tissue that remains. So I'll check back in with you after I've cut up this fat into smaller pieces. All right, so here is my fat that's been cut up into little pieces, and I have yet to cube the meat, but I've got my cast iron skillet going. It's on high heat now just to get it warmed up, and it's been heating up for, I don't know, about 30-45 seconds. I'm going to throw this meat on there and get it going. And while this fat is rendering, I'm going to cut up the actual meat into cubes, probably about inch by inch cubes. I'm also going to cut up an onion, and I'm going to cut up some mushrooms because I'll be making caramelized onions and mushrooms in the fat that we actually render off of this meat. So I will get those items started and check in with you every once in a while so you can see how the fat is progressing and what it looks like to chop some of these vegetables. All right, so I've been rendering this fat for about 8 minutes on medium-low heat, and the name of this game is to just take it easy and take it slow because you want to get all that fat out, but you don't want to burn the remaining meat. So this is a good time to prep your vegetables and do kind of any other prep work that you're going to need throughout this making this meal. So I've just cut up my meat into cubes here, and I'm going to put in 3 generous pinches. You'll hear me talking about pinches of salt instead of teaspoons or tablespoons. It's probably, a pinch is probably a teaspoon about. So I'm going to put in maybe 3 generous pinches of salt, mix it around. Maybe just use my hands because that's a little easier. And I'm just going to set that off to the side and get my vegetables prepped. So I'm going to cut up this onion. I have a package of baby portobello mushrooms and this garlic. I'm going to get those all cut up. I'm going to change my glove just because I was reaching my hand in that meat. And then I'll show you what my onions and my mushrooms look like when I'm cutting them. All right, I'm going to start out with this onion here, and I'm going to cut it in a specific way where the intention is to maximize the texture for being caramelized. So I'm going to cut off the root and the tip here. And cut it root to tip, so long ways. And you know, as a kid, I guess I always learned to cut onions like this so that they would have this kind of texture, like short grain texture or across the grain. But I've since learned that, you know, for people that might have sensitivities to onions, that's only going to exacerbate it, because the cells that contain sulfur, they grow long ways. So if you cut root to tip, if you have a sensitivity to onions, then it won't be as profound as you're cutting them. And also, if you're looking for a better texture or mouthfeel and less so potency, like cutting it across the grain is going to give it more odor and I guess potency. So if you're looking for that flavor in a burger, or for something where you really want a strong onion flavor, then that would be the right way to make that happen. But if you're looking for something that's more about texture and then the long ways is the way to do it. So I just recently learned that, and I've been liking it, because as I cut, it is true, it is less malodorous. All right, throw these guys in here. My veggie bowl, and I'm gonna throw in a pinch of salt, mix it up, and do another pinch just to get those liquids starting to come out. It'll draw the liquid out of the onions and will make it a little bit easier to caramelize. All right, and I'm gonna do, let's see, let me stir this. Oh, it's looking great. Turn it all the way down to low. And I put a pinch of salt in these before, because the truth is, after they're done, after the chitlins are done, they just taste amazing, and it's such an awesome snack to have. They're not fatty because all the fat's been rendered out, so it's just protein and collective tissue. Let's see. You know, it looks like a lot of mushrooms, but the truth is they come down in size. So we're going to start with 10 mushrooms here. I'm going to get out a paring knife, and I'm going to peel these mushrooms. So that way you don't have to wash them if you do it like this, and because you're peeling them, they don't get waterlogged after being washed, which is something that I don't like. I think it changes the texture. So I'm going to do that on all the rest of the mushrooms, and then I will slice them up and add them in with the onions. So we'll go through that there, and I'll get back with you. All right, so these have been going for about 20 minutes, and I wanted to show you what they look like, what these little fat pieces look like after they've been going for 20 minutes. See all those bubbles that are still coming out of them? That means that's all the liquid that's still coming out of them and the fat that's rendering out. So we're not quite there. Like I said, it does take a long time to render out all the fat. If you don't have time for this, you can just use a bit of canola oil and fry up your meat. You don't even have to cut the fat off if you don't want. I know some people are very sensitive to like gristle and things like that. So I do try to cut the fat off my meat, but you don't have to if it doesn't bother you. And you can really skip this step, but I'm one of those people that likes to, I don't know, maximize flavor. Yeah, I don't like wasting flavors. So this is one of the ways I'm trying to get the fat, the fat and flavor maximized in this dish. All right, so we're still working on the mushrooms, but I'll check back in with you in not too long. Okay, so I realized in the last shot you didn't really get a great view of what it looks like to peel a mushroom. So I'm going to keep the mushroom down here so that you can see more clearly. Right, and now we're going to chop up these mushrooms into slices, and I'm just going to add them to my vegetable bowl because I'm just going to caramelize them together with my onions. And if you have people in your family that can't eat mushrooms, you can make this dish with just onions and garlic. That's not a problem. It'll still be delicious. I like mushrooms. I like their texture. I like their flavor. And everyone in my family does as well. So that's why we include them. But I know that there are people with different palates. All right, so I'm going to cut the rest of these up, and then I'm going to show you the chitlins because they are almost done. All right, so these are my chitlins here. We've rendered off all the fat. I'm going to turn the heat down so that they don't burn as I'm pulling them out. And you can see there's still some of these bubbles, but a lot less. So I'm going to take this sieve that I have on a handle here. And toss it. I think I got this at one of the Asian stores for about $3 or $4. It's a really handy tool. All right, so I'm gonna get the last bits out of this, and then I'm actually gonna get my meat ready to fry in it. Once I get that meat fried, I'm going to put it into a pressure cooker and pressure cook it for about 25 minutes. That'll get the meat chunks really soft, and I'll also be making broth for myself. So I'm gonna get these out, and then I'm gonna show you me frying this meat. All right, so we have this meat fat heating up. After we've removed most of the solids, I'm just going to put a handful and this meat in there. And it's on medium heat. We're just going to cook these, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes. And kind of stir them around a little bit until they appear to be browned on all sides. And then I'm going to put them in this pot of water that I'm heating up right now. It will be a pressure cooker, and I'll cook that meat for 25 minutes. So I'm going to do this with all 3 batches, and I'll show you what it's going to look like at the end. Okay, while my meat is searing inside of this cast iron, I'm going to take some of these garlics and chop them up. I'm not going to put them with my onions and my mushrooms because garlics can burn pretty quickly. So I usually put them in at the end of a, like if I'm doing caramelizing. I won't do it at the very beginning, because I want to have really high heat when I begin the caramelization process, and I lower it after we've released a bit of the fluid that's inside of the onions and mushrooms. But if I have garlics in there at the same time, they might burn. So I like to keep them separate so that I can add them at a later time when I know that the onions and the mushrooms are not going to, aren't going to be burning, so that my garlic doesn't burn. I always get lazy when my garlics get to these little small pieces like this. I often just pull another head and get the easy cloves out, but you got to use the food. All right. Oh, I already did that part. So I have to make these videos after the baby goes to sleep, which usually means I've already had a full day of working, plus being home, working from home and spending time with her, and then as soon as I get off work, I'm with her, which is great, but often I'm already a little brain dead by the time I'm making these videos. So thank you for your patience with me. Well, it looks like this meat is ready to be transferred to the pot. I'll show you what that looks like. It looks like these are ready to be transferred to the pot that I'll be making beef broth in. And I'll just grab another handful of meat, put it in here. So I could probably do with a little more garlic, but we'll just do this for now. I'm just going to chop these. I'm going to mince them, roughly chop them, because it doesn't, I mean, we're going to be caramelizing them, so they don't have to be super uniform or anything like that. And you don't even really want them super small, because they're going to burn more easily if they're really small. That works. Okay, so we got our onions and our mushrooms and our garlic chopped. We're going to finish up our meat here, and then after that we're going to caramelize our mushrooms and our onions while we are boiling our meat so we can have homemade beef broth. Okay, so I've switched to burners here. I've moved my my cast iron skillet to this is a lower lower gas side of the stove, so it doesn't put out as much gas, whereas I need a lot of gas to get this pressure cooker rolling. So we have a roll and boil here. I'm going to put on my pressure cooker lid. It's going to get clicked into place, and you can hear it starting to work. It's going to close up this valve, and this rocker is going to get going at some point, and it's going to be our pressure cooker. You can use an Instant Pot. I just prefer the mechanical pressure cookers. I just feel like I'm in a little bit more control. Whether or not that's an illusion, I don't know. So I got these, I got this, it's pretty much just oil at this point and little bits of caramelized meat that's gotten stuck in here. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in some of my onions and mushrooms. I have it on medium-high heat. I'm just going to do a little at a time. These onions and mushrooms, for the most part, have already been salted, just to get the liquid out. And the liquid that is coming out of those onions and mushrooms is going to be cleaning the bottom of the pan where you might have had dried bits of meat get stuck. So this will be cleaning that by releasing its fluid. It's almost, it's like deglazing a pan with the actual veggies. And this might look like quite a lot, but once it all cooks down, it's going to be like, I don't know, less than half a cup. Because once it gets caramelized, you know, all that liquid comes out. It's really just the cellulose that's left in the onions, and the mushrooms shrink down quite a bit, but they actually, you'll see more volume in the mushrooms than you do in the onions. But man, the flavor is amazing. It makes the beef stroganoff taste so good. And again, if you don't have time to caramelize your mushrooms and your onions, you can saute them. And if you don't, if you have people in your family that aren't really particularly picky about onion texture, you can have a bit of that crunch. I can't eat onions that have like any sort of crunch in them, so this is one of the reasons why I like to caramelize them, because I do like the flavor of them when they're cooked, but I cannot eat them raw at all, and so that's one of the reasons why I kind of take this extra step. So I'll show you periodically where we're at with this caramelization process. I also make this for my baby. Like, my baby will eat this product, and she has a sensitivity to dairy, so I don't make it with butter. But you could, you should really. It's quite delicious if you add butter to the process along the way. I will be adding canola oil. It's pretty much a flavorless oil, so it just takes on the flavor of whatever it is you're cooking with. But if you were going to be doing this, I would recommend using butter, and you'll want to use unsalted butter. If you use salted butter, it's going to mess up all your proportions of salt in your food. Salted butter is fine if you're just putting it on a piece of bread, but if you're trying to cook with it, it's much better to use unsalted. So I'm going to you can see quite a bit of liquid has come out. We're going to be boiling this off before we really get to the caramelization process. And you can hear the rocker on the pressure cooker is rocking and rolling here. So when it starts rocking like this, I turn it down to 4. And then I'm going to set my timer for 25 minutes. And when we're done, we'll have probably some finished caramelized onions and mushrooms, and we'll have this amazing beef broth, and we'll get to making our gravy, which is the base of the beef stroganoff. All right, so this onion and mushroom mixture has been going for about 6 minutes now on high, so you can see quite a bit of the liquid has evaporated, and we're really starting that caramelization process. So I'm going to go ahead and put the garlics in here. And turn this down to low heat. It smells amazing. I guess garlic always smells amazing, no matter what. So I'm gonna kind of spread these out, and then I'm gonna put on a tight-fitting lid, and just come back and mix it up every couple minutes, and I'll check in with you and let you know the progress along the way, so you can see how long it takes. And yeah, I'll check back in not too long and let you know where we're at. Alright, so these have been going for 5 minutes, and we're going to check in here, see what they look like, see what kind of stirring needs to be done, see if we need to lower the temperature or add any oil. Yeah, I'm going to lower the temperature. I have it on about 3 right now. I'm going to go down to a 1, which is not quite a low. We want to do the same thing that we did with the fat pieces, where we were rendering out the fat, but we didn't want to actually burn the rest of the proteins and all of that. So we kind of want to do the same thing here, where we want to render out all of the water, but we don't want to burn the rest of the food that remains. Alright, so I'll put it out, lay it out flat here. I don't think I need to add any more oil at this time. and we'll check back in a few minutes here. All right, so it's been another 6 minutes, and I'm going to take this top off here and stir our mushrooms and onions. We have about 7 minutes left on our beef broth, and I'm going to keep this cooking. I want it to cook down even further, get it an even richer, darker color. And in the meantime, I'm doing dishes so that cleanup tonight won't go so late. I'll check back in a few minutes here. Alright, so it's been another 5 minutes. I'm going to pull this off here. Oh, it smells so good. It smells so sweet and rich. We have a little bit to go. This rocker here is this pressure cooker is about to reach its 25 minutes in just a couple seconds here. So what I'm going to do is turn it off, and it needs a little bit of time to come down for the heat and the pressure to come down so that the locking mechanisms will come open. While that's happening, it's going to continue cooking on the inside for a while. And so I'll have an opportunity to continue caramelizing those onions and those mushrooms until they get soft enough and creamy enough that we can move on to our stroganoff. So here we are. All right, so I'll turn this heat off, and I'll just let this cool down, and by the time this is cooled, or cooled enough that I can actually open the locking mechanism, because the steam and pressure push this mechanism up right here. It pushes it up, and so when the temperature comes down, the steam comes down, and then that locking mechanism unlocks, and then I can open it, and that's when it's safe. So by the time that has cooled down, this should be ready to be removed from the pan, and then we can start on our gravy. All right, see you in a few. Okay, so it's been about another 8 minutes, and I'm going to pull off this top here. Ooh, yes. Oh my goodness. I've moved back over to my favorite burner. That was my not his favorite burner. This is my favorite burner. Yes, this is looking great. I'm just going to let it go for a little longer. We're still on super low heat. That's below 1, lower than 1. I'm just going to let this keep going for a bit. And you can see our rocker is still, but it's still releasing its heat. So that'll probably unlock in about, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. And I think we should be ready to go by then. So I'm not going to check back in with you until we're ready to remove these onions and mushrooms and start on our gravy. Okay, so the locking mechanism has opened on this pressure cooker. So I'm going to open the container here. And yes. You can still see it boiling. I don't have any heat on, but you can see all the meat. And I'm going to separate out this meat from this broth. And the meat should be really tender. Kind of falls apart just by me shaking it here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and taste this beef broth. I want to see how much salt's in it, if I could use it for a broth. I'm going to add just a little bit of water because it's just a tad salty. And I don't want, when you're using broth, you want it to be basically the flavor of what you want your gravy to be. So the amount of salt you have in your broth is the amount of salt that's going to come out in your gravy. So I added, I don't know, maybe about a cup and a half. That's better. Yeah, that's better. Okay. So I have that meat set off to the side, and now we're going to take a look at, let me get a ladle first before we go any further because we'll need it. Now let's take a look at these caramelized onions and mushrooms. Oh man, they smell so good. It almost smells like candy. You can really smell the sugar. You can really smell the caramel. And if you look at all that liquid that's coming out, that's fat there. So I'm going to take my favorite little kitchen gadget, just sieve out as much fat as I can. And you can see, this is so much less volume than we started with. Alright. So it fits in that little cup. All of those onions and mushrooms fit in that little cup right there. Alright. So I'm going to add a little bit of canola oil because I want to have more fat in my pan when I start my gravy. Heat that up. And you're going to have those onion bits and beef bits and mushroom bits sitting around in here, and that's just going to make your gravy really rich and kind of sweet. The saltiness of the broth will really tone down the sweetness of the mushrooms and the onions. Turn this down to about medium heat and start making our gravy. I don't usually measure out pretty much anything, honestly, but especially not with gravies, because it's something I think one has to feel out. They have to know what texture they're looking for, and it's really hard to get that down with exact measurements, or at least it is for me. So, I mean, I've done, let's see, about 3 or 4 heaping soup spoon sizes of flour. And I don't mind this being a little dry. So this is kind of a drier gravy, or drier roux. You know, just depending on how much you want to make. One of the reasons I'm keeping it a bit drier is because I'm going to toss in the onions and the mushrooms after the flour has cooked a bit, about 4 or 5 minutes. I'm going to toss in those onions and mushrooms, and those onions and mushrooms still have quite a bit of fat on them. So by making this a bit of a drier roux, when I add those mushrooms and onions, it's going to end up thinning out this roux. So then when I add the broth, it'll just be a nice flavor balance. So I'm going to keep cooking this. I'll turn it down just a little bit lower so I don't end up burning it. Keep cooking this for a few minutes, and then I'll check back in with you when it's almost ready to be quenched with first the onions and mushrooms, and then with the broth we just made. All right, so this has been cooking for about 5 minutes, and you want to cook your flour, you want to cook your roux so that you don't smell like really the flour scent anymore. It'll start smelling a little bit nutty, or it'll take on the flavor of like the oil or the meat. So I'm going to go ahead and add my mushrooms and my onions right here. You can see it kind of starts to quench that roux with some of the residual liquids that are in there. Alright, so now I'm going to put in just a ladleful of this beef broth at a time. That might actually have been too much, but it'll evaporate. You just want to add a little at a time, because if you add too much, you'll have lumpy gravy and you'll have to get a whisk out. But if you just do a little bit at a time, it'll kind of clump up like this, and it looks like it's not going to work out, but it absolutely will work out. I'm rocking it at about 2, so low heat. Let's put in another ladleful. So I'm showing you this whole process because this channel is about making gravies. I mean, this is really the crux of what this video is about and why it is here. And B, you know, gravies can be kind of a mystery to people because they kind of go through this weird transformation that is a bit non-linear. And, you know, unless you are familiar with it or you've seen it or done it a lot, it can just not, it doesn't make sense for a lot of people, and they give up before they're all the way done. So that's one of the reasons why I like to show the entire gravy making process, you know, even though I might skip ahead with other things like chopping or cooking times, things like that. I do like to show the gravy making process so that when you're at home and you're making this meal and it kind of comes to what some people feel is the most complex part of making the meal, that you have a model right in front of you. And I try to show it in every video where I am making gravy so that so you can see like the different ways it will look. You know, sometimes if you add liquid too quickly or you don't add enough at a time, just, you know, each time you make gravy, it's going to be its own unique experience. So I just want you to be able to see the different ways that it can look as it's coming together. Yeah, this is looking good. Right, I'm just going to taste it to see if it's too salty. No, it's not, actually. I was a little concerned that I hadn't put enough water in the broth, but it's actually a pretty good consistency in terms of pretty good flavor in terms of salt. Okay, this is, I think I'm going to add one more ladleful, but this is about where I like to stop with stroganoff. Once we add the meat, it'll have a lot more texture. You can see in here the onions have pretty much disappeared, and the only thing that really remains are the mushrooms, and they're pretty small as is. So that's gonna make this liquid feel a little thicker, is having those dissolved onions in here. I'm gonna do a little old Cajun trick my grandma taught me, who was 100% Cajun. I'm just gonna put in like 3 drops of Tabasco sauce. And the reason why I do that is because I don't really want it to be hot, but capsaicin does, it kind of has it's a sensation. It's not just a flavor, it's a sensation. And so just 3 drops of it can kind of cause a tingling sensation in the mouth without it being actually hot. So for people who can't handle heat, usually 2 or 3 drops. And again, it's not even really about making it hot. It's about changing the way that it feels when it hits your mouth. So I'm going to add the meat in. Let's see how much meat. I may not add all of it in. I may save some of that meat for another endeavor, like a soup or something, because I started out with a whole chuck roast, and usually when I'm making this dish, it's with leftovers, so it might be about half a chuck roast or half the amount of meat that I used. Let's keep going. This meat is so tender after it's been through the pressure cooker. If you don't have one, you know, I think you can get the mechanical ones for not too much online. This is a Presto mechanical pressure cooker. I know Instapot, I think they're real popular now. Just someone in my family had one of those electronic ones like blow up on them, so we've just been kind of hesitant to use those electronic ones, but a lot of people, you know, have no problem with them, so but that's why we kind of stick to mechanical pressure cookers. So I think I used maybe just a little more than half of the meat that I started with. So this is what remains. And I'll just turn that into a soup or something like that. My baby likes to eat just big ol' hunks of meat as is. Speaking of which, because she has a dietary sensitivity to dairy products, I'm going to pull some of this out right now and just set it aside, and that'll be for her, because the last step here is to add cream cheese, and it makes such a huge difference. I actually made stroganoff 2 times last week, and the first time I made it, I did not caramelize onions. I just had mushrooms that I had sauteed, and I had put cream cheese in it. This was about a third of a cup cubed. I put cream cheese in it, and it was good. And I was inspired and decided to make another batch, but this time doing the caramelization of the onions and the mushrooms, and it was just like off the charts, crazy good. But I didn't have any cream cheese. I used sour cream, which in my opinion actually reduced the quality of the flavors. I mean, I could taste how much improved like part of the flavors were because of the onions and the mushrooms, but I could also taste that the lactic acid and the acidity in the sour cream it didn't make it bad. It was just not perfect. And so I'm going to try, that's why I'm putting cream cheese in this time. And I cut them into chunks so that they'll melt a little bit easier. I'm going to turn the heat up just a touch. All right, and I'm going to get back with you in just a couple minutes after these cream cheese chunks have melted, and then we're going to do a taste test. All right, so I've put some fresh ground cracked pepper in there, and the cream cheese has melted. And you can even see all that meat that I put in there has kind of almost disintegrated and is part of the gravy, not necessarily as these big chunks, but these pieces of meat that are strewn throughout it. And so last week when I had made 2 batches, I had tried the first one with pasta, and it was good. But then I tried the second one with brown rice, and it was just like out of this world. It was as if the flavors were intended to be for brown rice. So, you know, I know Stroganoff kind of has this, reputation that it goes over pasta, but I'm going to try my batch here with brown rice and do a little taste test, see how it turned out. It's so good, so rich, but not overpowering. It's really flavorful, and it feels so hearty. It's just like a super hearty meal. And I'm going to have a big old bowl of this and relax for the evening, and then hopefully get to bed in not too distant future. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section, or if you know me in real life, you can just tell me to my face. I want to hear what you have to say. Thanks.